I just want to say thanks for inviting us and allowing us to talk a little bit about the Integrated Personnel and Pay System Army. We think this is a pretty big thing for the Army. And we're excited to be here for a couple of different reasons. So let me couch how we're going to go through the slides and then open it up for questions. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are with our Release 2. We're about ready to field to the National Guard. So we're excited. We know the National Guard is going to be excited, but really it's the first precursor for the whole Army being excited as we get through the National Guard, because next is the reserves and the active force. We're going to talk a little bit about the big capabilities of IPPS-A and the big problems that we're solving. There's an absolute strategic problem we are solving with IPPS-A, and you can't solve it without something like IPPS-A. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then talk about our release schedule for the rest of the program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Darby McNulty, who's the PM of the program, talk a little bit about where we are with Release 2.
Okay. Morning, everyone. My name is Darby McNulty. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Hey, so we're, it's no longer a question of if with IPPS-A, it's a matter of when. So we're doing the final system testing up in the state of Pennsylvania. We got about 150 people up there from the National Guard Bureau headquarters. Fantastic support from our Army National Guard teammates. So there's a whole bunch of people at the top of the system from MGB that are helping us work all the how this is going to work in the 2B environment, policies, regulations. We're fixing the final software defects on the program. There's a whole team from Pennsylvania across the state, and they've been great partners to help us get this thing out the door. They volunteered to do this a couple years ago, and they've been all in with us for the last 2 years. So where we're at is we're doing the final system acceptance testing. So what does that mean? We're tuning it up. So the thing known as IPPS-A is working. We're in the process of making it run a little bit faster, a little bit more reliably, and fixing the final set of defects that are in the software. So we've been kind of working about 7 days a week for the last couple months to make this happen, and we're driving hard towards a LUT that's going to user test, operational test. Great support from our ATEC and DOT&E teammates to help us get this out the door, but that's going to be in November and December. Taking us to a deployment decision with the Army leadership in the January timeframe.
So we're pretty excited about that, but let's go to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the reasoning of why there's a need for IPPS-A. You know, big problems deserve big answers. I'll say that again. So big problems deserve big answers. And IPPS-A is meant to tackle those big problems. So General McConville likes to talk about IPPS-A in several capabilities. He says, hey, for the first time ever, we're going to have everybody in one system, so total force. We're going to institute talent management. We're going to change our HR system from the current processes to a talent management system. Well, you can't do that without IPPS-A. IPPS-A is meant to help shape the Army's HR moving forward in the 21st century. And then, of course, get auditable. So end to end, you understand what's happening with soldier pay and what's going on with soldier actions. So three big capabilities. But up in the upper left-hand corner of this slide, it really shows our system architecture. So I'm not kidding when I tell you that the U.S. Army has about 200 different personnel and pay systems. 200. And the infrastructure, IT infrastructure that goes to keeping those 200 up. So no shocking issue is data. When you think about data, when you think about those 200 systems, how do you coalesce all that data? What is authoritative? How do you even see yourself? In fact, it's so bad today that it takes about 2 weeks to roll up in the Army the strength numbers for female captains, or any other strength number for all three systems. And the reason is because each component has its own system. In the National Guard, you have a thing called SIDPERS. And they don't just have one SIDPERS machine, they have 54 SIDPERS machines, each state and territory different than the other. How do you roll those up? Well, you got to roll them up like from a distributed database perspective into another database. In the active force, we have just as many systems. We have TOPMIS, we have EMILPO, we have EDAS, we have other systems. Which is authoritative? Right now it's questionable. Officers use a thing called TOPMIS to update their ORBs. Well, they really should be updating their stuff in EMILPO. But why do they go to TOPMIS? It's a little bit easier. But anyway, you have data fratricide. There's issues there. And the reserves have their own systems as well. So IPPS-A is meant to, for the first time ever, consolidate everybody into one system so that you can see everybody and then you can start to change how you actually execute your business processes. But you're not going to figure out quickly what the eaches and the numbers and the strength and the readiness of our force without a system like IPPS-A.
So when people ask me, what's the hardest part of your job, it's actually not implementing the commercial products from Oracle or other companies that we're rolling out. The hardest part of this job is taking down those 200 different systems, some of which have been used for going on 30 and 40 years and are completely ingrained. So you can't modernize until you take down this mess right here, and it is a real mess. So that's why we're kind of rolling this thing out. We'll show you later on in pieces. We're not going to deliver everything all at once. We're going to get the first thing out the door, which is the core set of products and capabilities. We're going to start with the Army National Guard, and every year we're going to make it better. So you'll see that we're going to start with the Guard and then go to the active and reserves for HR. But the reality is we're going to continue to improve this every day as we go by. And I will tell you that we have done very minimal customization to this thing. So for the next release, we already have upgraded all the commercial software products, right? It only took us about a week to do that. So think Apple. So when you customize, it's very difficult to upgrade. So that's why we're going to get the first thing out the door, and then we're going to continue to make it better. But the hardest part of this journey, and it takes a whole army to do it, is to take down the 200 different systems we use today.
You know, a major part of the system too, you tie, and this may seem a little boring, but we find it exciting, you're going to tie HR and pay together. So today, most of you guys understand, you do a HR transaction, you do it on a piece of paper, you take it across the street at the post, you give it to another person, they code it into a different system, and then that's how you get paid. Well, what could go wrong with that, right? What could go wrong with that? Well, we have a lot of soldier pay errors all over the place. Universally, if you deploy, you don't get paid immediately. It takes a month or 2 months to actually get the right pay. Why? It's because there's a complete air gap between your pay and your HR systems. IPPS-A is going to solve that. It's going to bring it together. You update the duty status location of a soldier, it automatically updates the pay. Because inside the system, you can run business rules. Really simple. It's called modern technology. We're moving away from the 86 and the early 90s technology that we're utilizing in the 200 personnel systems, and we're moving into a space that you can modernize, track, and execute HR pay and talent management seamlessly. And Colonel McNulty highlighted one of the key strategic pieces of this software. You can upgrade it over time. You know, part of the reason why you have SIDPERS boxes in the National Guard, which were fielded in 1986, by the way, it's because you can't upgrade those easily. Well, with the COTS software that we've purchased, you can update it easily. And that's the point. We want to continuously upgrade our product, our capabilities, our functionality as we go to the right. And you can't do that with this plethora of 200 plus systems today. So that's a big component of what we're doing.
Yeah, so when you know, I get a lot of senior leaders, frankly, that say there's not a problem with pay today, right? And that's actually not true. So when you, and I don't usually tell them that like that, but when you look at the numbers up at OSD, I do, sir. You know me. When you look at the numbers up at OSD across all the services for two metrics, timeliness and accuracy of pay, we're actually in last place. And we're in the low 90s. So anyone who says we don't have problems with pay today, and it has nothing to do with our great teammates at DFAS or our great HR professionals. As Colonel Johnson said, there's an air gap between the two. So we're actually in the low 90s. So if you were to take 1.1 million soldiers and multiply it by 0.08, do the math. That's a lot of pay problems, right? So sneaking up on 10% of the Army having pay problems. And then when you move between compos, right? So Greg and I on 3 different sort of tours have hit all the combatant commands, right? So when you go over, last year when we were over there with General Hodge at USER for the Commanders Conference, we talked to a bunch of people from the Guard and Reserve. You know, and they went from their state to a MOB site to Germany to a second location and forward into Lithuania, and every one of them had a pay problem going on. Now they had great folks back in their state for reach back to support them, and then when they came back, there was problems getting their records updated. So, but I will tell you, the fact that we've been taking on the data, right, cleaning up the data, because HR drives all pay. We've started to see improvement before we've even fielded IPPS-A because we're cleaning the data, and that's getting after timeliness and accuracy problems.
One big change too is as you move towards a system that you're going to execute all pay transaction in, you can actually trace the actual actions. So again, it's not too sexy, talking in a warfighter's corner about tracing transactions, but it actually builds the baseline of big data for the Army. Today, you don't really know what's going on with actions. Tomorrow, you will. And it opens up a massive ability for big data and then using artificial intelligence to see what is going on with our processes, what is going on in certain parts of the Army. It's the baseline to get there. You have to do this before you can get to that. And that's a strategic impact that IPPS-A will bring. Other key pieces, and Darby's going to talk a little bit about mobile because I think that's fantastic. We're moving into a mobile environment that you can execute your self-service actions on a mobile phone and on a personal mobile phone. Again, this is territory that the Army hasn't really seen, but we're moving into it now, which is exciting. And then we'll talk a little bit about the 25-point profile in a couple of slides, which is really the baseline of how we're going to collect data on individuals and help to shape what a holistic talent profile of everyone in the Army looks like. Next slide, please.
Okay, so as Greg just mentioned, about 3 years ago, we've got a requirement to do mobile. About 3 years ago, we put it on contract with our industry teammates. And I had probably 25 senior leaders tell me I was a fish swimming upstream. I was out of my mind. Yes, I agreed with the swimming upstream part, and I probably am a little bit out of my mind. But it's important to get us into the 21st century. Right now, how much of the Army runs on mobile devices? A lot. So much of the Army is doing business on their personal mobile devices, completely not in a secure environment. And anyone who says that we're not operating like that is not being completely honest. I see it everywhere I go across the globe, across the 3 compos. People are sending stuff to their personal devices, and the reason they're doing that is the whole country runs on mobile except for the Army, right? So we've recently partnered with the G6 to get the regulations changed to allow you to do things on personal mobile devices. We're partnered with DMDC to do an initial DS logon. I think we're going to continue to make that a little bit more robust. But as we get deeper into IPPS-A, you're going to be able to do more and more things on your personal mobile device. Think self-service. Think how you do business with USAA today, or Charles Schwab, or Merrill Lynch, TD Ameritrade, all the banks. We need to get in that environment, right? So, and the other thing, I think it's important, if you're a young person, so what percent of the Army is millennial or younger, right? We all do business the same way they do, right? Negative. So when I tell someone who's 30 years old, hey, we're going to do mobile, and they're like, well, about time, right? About time. Some of our screens are green, right? And so when the younger 2 generations in the Army, Generation Z, second class, just graduated from basic training, when they see a green screen, I mean, they think they're watching a science fiction movie, right? We've just gotten used to it. So we're really going to be able to accommodate, because IPPS-A is not for the older generation. It's for the next 3, the youngest 2 and the next 2 generations after that. And they do business a lot differently than we do. So this is going to be exciting. So sure would be great if I wanted to go on leave, if everything was pre-populated on my phone and all I had to do is type in where I'm going, for how long, and confirm that the address and phone number that's already in there for me is correct. And then it goes, right? Think about how we do that today. So we're going to continue to add more and more mobile capability, and I think this is one of the most exciting aspects of what we're doing.
On their strategic impacts, right? So today when you turn in a leave form or a personnel action and you give it to your squad leader, or shoot, even if you're a general officer and you put it in your leave, you ask, hey, where's that piece of paper, right? Nobody knows. So one big thing with the system is, hey, it's transparent. You're going to do it off this thing, you're going to do your action, and it's traceable. So strategic impact. You can't keep treating soldiers like we're in the 1950s. Hey, you're going to turn in an action, you're going to turn in a leave form, but I'm never going to tell you what's going on with it. Moving into the future, we have to treat people like adults. We do all kinds of things. We allow soldiers to deploy, make life or death decisions, but we won't let them understand what's going on with their personnel actions. It's time to change. It's time to change. There's a strategic need to change in this space very specifically. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, we'll talk a little bit about talent management. So we talked data up front. The real key with IPPS-A, it's going to allow us to coalesce the data that's out there on individuals. And we're going to do that through the unveiling of what we call the 25-point profile, which is really the next slide that I'll talk about. But really the key here is once you get the data together and you get it organized and you're able to display it, you're going to find out a whole heck of a lot about soldiers you have no clue about today. A whole heck of a lot. People have talents that the Army has no idea. When I came into this job, I asked my team, hey, who's the data experts? Who do I have on my team that actually understands how to code, how to build databases and whatnot? And everybody kind of looked at me. And I said, how are we building IPPS-A without that kind of talent on the team? So then I went to branch and I said, hey, can you tell me who the best data people are in the HR Corps? And then they kind of looked at me on the phone. I could see it, right? You know, they were like, well, we don't really track that. And I said, why? Well, we don't have systems that track that for me. So then I went on this mad email campaign, right? Some of you might have seen my more recent, requests from the Army. I need database experts. And all of a sudden I started finding all kinds of talent out there, but it was by word of mouth. And then we pulled them onto the team to work this problem set, because this is not an easy problem set. That 200 systems, the data all over the place, it's the most difficult thing that we're doing right now. We're fixing the data, but you need the talent to execute it. In the future, we're going to track that. So we're going to know where the talent is. We're going to track it. Big problems need big solutions. Big problems need big solutions.
Yeah, and I'd say, so I've been kind of on like a 4.5-year journey with this thing called talent management, right? And so I think the key thing that goes along with what Colonel Johnson said is, yeah, you can call it a 25-point profile. The key is to get the correct data organized and structured inside the system. So where I spend a lot of my time focusing is things are going to change over time. We'll decide one day Colonel Johnson can see this, the next day he can't. That's fine. The system is openly architected to accommodate that. So the key is to actually get the data in there and make sure it's accurate and correct and structured and searchable. So we can continue to add things over time, and we can change table structures and how we sort, and we can add things over time. So we kind of see this as, let's get the engine built, and then let's continue to add capability based on the things we want to see with respect to the attributes in the system.
You know, in this 25-point profile that we have on the screen now, it's really the effort of about 24 months. General McConville said, hey, execute talent management, and let's look at talent in a different way. So we initiated work groups with commanders at all echelons, at all components. We ran about 20 work groups. We had about 300 command sergeant majors and commanders across the force, all three components. And essentially asked them, what do you want to see? What do you want to see? What kind of talent information do you want to see? Do you want to understand, who deployed as an S3 to NTC? Guess what? You can't do that today. Army has no idea. Do you want to see that in the future? It may matter. What else do you want to see? Obviously, readiness. I want to understand your experiences. What do you bring to the table? Well, if you want to understand what you bring to the table, you got to have self-professed abilities. You have to allow soldiers to self-profess. HRC is executing a pilot. It's called AIM-2 that does that today. And IPPS-A over time is going to take over that functionality and inject it in the terms of a 25-point profile for each officer, NCO, and warrant officer. So big things to come. This is going to be a journey. This is not a, hey, in 1 year we're going to have this done. The Army changes slowly, so this is going to take us some time. It's going to take us some time, and at the end of the day, on those self-professed skills, we're going to have to incentivize them. We're going to have to show that the Army is going to utilize those skills for people to self-profess them. All right, next slide, please. All right, a little bit about mill pay. Again, we talked about it up front. Really tie in HR and pay together. And the big thing here is HR drives already most of your pay. So we're just bringing that over into the system, and then it's traceable, and then you can change business rules to then generate the pay as you execute HR. So big change, not as sexy, but we find it pretty exciting on the team.
Yeah, I mean, so same thing with taking down 200 systems. If you think about the Army today, I like to joke that HR and pay have been separate since the beginning of our nation, right? So there was a guy on horseback next to George Washington. His name was Horatio Gates, right? He was the first adjutant general of the United States Army, and there was another guy on horseback next to him who was the paymaster. So even as hard as my job is to calculate, roughly $70 billion of global payroll a year, which is no small task, his journey across the Army to get people to change how we actually handle soldiers' pay and process things is just as big of a task, because we've literally had HR and pay on two sides of the commander since the 1700s.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is release 2. We're there. As you can see, we're going to release to the National Guard in regions. We're in that final test, as Colonel McNulty highlighted up front, with the Pennsylvania National Guard. Really excited to get going. This has been a journey to get here, but this is reality. We're here. We're ready to go. We're doing the final corrections in our test right now, and then we're going to execute delivering to the National Guard over this next year.
So I think the key thing here is we need to make sure that we are condition, event-based, not 100% time-driven. So like for each one of the states and territories, Greg and I need to be able to look the two-star adjutant general in the eye and go, it's kind of like check, check, we're good. Because once we start to turn off their systems, we become live and authoritative. So that's what we're doing. We have a very detailed, starting at D-minus 360 out. Every month there's a big, very detailed checklist we go through all the way up to D-Day. But when you get about 2 weeks out, it's kind of like Greg and I with the TAG and the TAG's leadership from each state going, all right, we've satisfied these things. So if there's two really important things, either on the system or with respect to the state or territory, then we need to take the time to make sure they're tight before we roll this out. It's too important.
All right, next slide, and we'll end with our basic schedule. So, you know, one of the keys to release 2 is to continuously update as we go along for the release groups. Well, you know, what's coming next is the active duty, and then we'll completely tie personnel and pay into the system in our release 4. So more to come, more updates to come, and you know, hey Army, we're going to get this to you. We'll start with the National Guard, and then we'll get the rest of the Army into the system soon. So with that, we'll pause and we'll ask for questions.
My name is Jay Mohan. I'm with TRADOC G9. Are you taking lessons learned from the other services? Because, you know, they've got pay and human resource things too. And then the other thing, are you looking at integrating in civilian systems into this too?
So, so the question was, are we capturing lessons learned from other big scale software developments? The answer is absolutely. With respect to integrating personnel and pay, the Coast Guard has done this. They're using an earlier version of the software, and we're using a couple different products to integrate the mobile and the self-service. But the Air Force and Navy are actually behind us. So, but having said that, we've been partnered with the Navy and the Air Force for 5 years, sharing lessons learned and information. So I think there is a good partnership there. We've also captured lessons learned from other ERPs. You know, in the Army, I think we're kind of out in front of everyone in this area with GFEBS and with LMP and G-Army. You know, we spent a lot of time asking them what went well with the system, what didn't go well, how did you do, what was the approach for training. With respect to the civilian piece for HR and pay, I believe there's an OSD program that's taken that piece on to integrate that. I think it's called DRAS, if I'm not mistaken, and they're doing a modernization.
That's good.
Blake Order, I'm with the Reserve Forces Policy Board. I've got a question on how quickly or what kind of team you've got set up to react to issues that you discover as it gets rolled out. And I'll just use an example of what happened when we did the online OER system. And there were situations where somebody would find a glitch in the OER system and would send in a message saying, hey, this is screwed up, I can't do this when I do this. And it amazed me that within a week, that got fixed. And I recognize this is a much more complicated situation, but you set up with some sort of tiger team that will jump on those things, and it won't take months to get some glitch resolved.
Okay, you want to? Yeah. So great question, sir. Yeah, that's one of the systems that we actually sort of sat down with our teammates at HRC and said, you know, what are some lessons learned, and that was one of the positive ones. Is so I would say just in our area alone, between, you know, Colonel Johnson and I, we share the same office space. Our systems integrator that's doing the software development, everyone is in the same location in the Polk building in Crystal City. There's a very large team from the reserve, a very large team from the guard, a very large team from the active component. So the functional support, the functional expertise to get after things like you're talking about, sir, is absolutely there, and all hands on deck. And then we've bought a software product called CRM that integrates your help environment with your transactional environment. So as we start to see things, you can see exactly what's happening and where, and then it's kind of 5-tiered. Get the problem to the right place, whether it's highly technical or highly functional, and to get that integrated with mobile, so that if you're experiencing a problem, it's going to go through there. This is functional, here's what it is, and then it kind of escalates up onto a dashboard so we can see these things. We've done a couple rehearsals with the top of the system, which is Human Resources Command. Their team's fantastic at Fort Knox to help us sort of war game that. So I think will we get better as we get deeper into it? Absolutely, sir. But I think we got a pretty good approach to doing that.
And I'll just caveat, sir. So my 10 best folks are right now tied to Release 2. They helped build Release 2 with the National Guard. They're right in Pennsylvania in the test with the National Guard, and that whole team is going to stay with Release 2 as a sustainment element for the entirety of Release 2 rollout. So we're already organizing in that fashion. The National Guard has created what they call a P3 cell. It's essentially a sustainment cell that will be at NGB that will execute updates to what they have as a user guide, their policies tied to how the actions in IPPS-A work, and then how those actions tie to their other National Guard systems, but then also help adjudicate as those defects, errors, tweaks, those things pop up. So from a functional side, we're pretty tight with the talent that will be in place for the next year, and then we're pretty tight in tying in with the PM and the contractor to execute those over time. So I think we have a good game plan, sir, and then it's about how rapidly can we execute when we see.
So it also goes back, sir, to let's not just shove this down the throats of the Army. We're tracking a certain number of defects that need to be fixed. We've developed a couple hundred very relevant operational mission scenarios, kind of end-to-end. These are all the things that could happen in the system, and we're pounding the heck out of the system now so that we can identify as many of these things before we roll out the door. And it is a massively, it's the largest, probably the largest one of this kind ever. So we're going to discover things, and I agree with you, sir. Having that right team standing in the ready to take them on is important.
Good afternoon. So my question is back to the subject of talent management. Talent management is a broad system, and coming from a data science background, I appreciate starting with the 25-point system so we have the data there. But how do you envision using that information to actually do talent management and have HR professionals have the capabilities to make those data-driven decisions and ultimately improve the force?
I would say, up front, for us it's about, you got to execute in stages, right? So you can't change every policy imaginable without really seeing what you have. So us is getting the data straight, and then over time analyzing what that looks like, and then making informed decisions. So from a system perspective, that's how we're executing and moving forward. The Army does have several entities throughout the Army that's looking at this very closely. So Task Force Talent Management, for instance, taking a look at the new authorities that we've been granted over this last session of Congress, and seeing how that can work. HRC running pilot programs on what they call AIM-2, which is basically a marketplace where an individual soldier says, hey, here's some talents that I have, individual commander saying this is what I'm looking for, and seeing how that interaction goes. And then I think where a lot of work is we're going to see over the next several years is what type of assessments do we use? So the Army uses all kinds of assessments, right? You take an ASVAB test when you come in. The Special Operations community uses a lot of other testing. Other elements use testing. How do we think about that in a holistic, broad manner, and then put that into our system then to execute off of? So all of that's kind of percolating right now. So there's no direct answer to your question, except we're getting all the pieces together to be able to fundamentally change how we operate. So again, it's going to be I think a bit of a journey here, But let me take you back into history, right? So we're essentially operating today like we did in 1947, right? So 2 variables, you got an MOS of an 11 series, and he's a major. I generally put that person into jobs that are 11 series, major coded. We don't think about much else. We do in black books and certain key assignments and certain post-KD assignments, but by and large, you execute off those 2 variables. So we're trying to pivot off of something that's been around for a long time. So saying that we're going to change everything in a day or a week or a year is probably not fully realistic for our institution. But we're putting the pieces in place to actually make that change happen.
And I think the important thing is to set up the engine, structure the data, set up the engine so you can run the search and compares, and then staying plugged into General McGee and the Talent Management Task Force, so as we learn things as an Army, we can change the system. So we get feedback from the Talent Management Task Force all the time, and I think that's critical, right? We set up the engine and they're like, okay, move this from here to here. I want to be able to search this different. And then set the thing up so you can create kind of a marketplace, which is kind of how our modern commercial equivalents operate. We back.
We've talked a lot about data. So can you comment on where we stand with the completed part, the trusted database, which was released in, what does it say, 2015? So what is it doing now?
So I think I would say that as we unpack those 200 systems more and more that we talked about, we discovered that the database was less and less trusted, right? So our notion of a trusted database as an Army, and this isn't Colonel Greg Johnson and I, this is as an Army across all 3 compos, the deeper we got into the data, the more problems we saw. So for example, for the Guard, I can turn on Pennsylvania, we can be check. But if we're not careful, we might screw up 53 other states and territories, right? So you got to make sure this is good. And so we literally had to build this very complex sort of referential data model to keep things cycling properly at the top of the system as we went from 1, 2B, 53 as is, and then we're going to add a second and a third. And the same is going to be true with the active component and the reserves as we unpack these older systems. So I would say what we thought was a trusted database and what was reality, the deeper we got into, speaking candidly, were 2 very different things. Now, having said that, I think we've got a really good group of folks, not just on Greg and I's teams, but across the 3 compos and out across the commands that's working very hard to fix the data. But I will say those who take the time to fix it will have an easier deployment than those who do not. So we'll clearly see as we go across the 3 compos, some units will do better than others, and the ones that really get after it with us will be saying this is great. The ones who didn't will be pretty fired up probably. So I think it's important that we follow what was written in the fragos that are getting pushed out to the Army, so we're not trying to fix data 2 or 3 weeks out from a deployment. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Well, the only thing I would add too is that it actually, for the first time ever, allowed the Army to see what the quality of the data was. It was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. Hey, why does that say that? What? Where is that coming from? And it identified, again, it goes back to the central biggest problem here, is getting this data correct, getting it consolidated, and then locking down what authoritative data means. Because right now there is no control of that in the Army. We're spending a lot of time and effort all over the place doing circles and cheetah flips on updating multiple databases that aren't authoritative. And then the senior leaders can't really see easily what we got in the Army. So that database, a lot of people said a lot of things about it, right? All kinds of comments all over the place. But for me, it's like, hey, you're looking in the mirror and you don't like what you see, but it's you, right? It's you. So own it and let's go after this big problem, right? This needs a big solution. So don't ignore it. Don't hide your head in the sand. In the Army, we pride ourselves on leadership. Let's go after and solve this for the Army.
The reality is we have some of the most amazing HR and finance professionals across all 3 compos. But the other reality is it takes miracles for them to do their job, right? So, you know, I had the, I'll call it the, I want to say pleasure, I'm a field artillery guy, of being a brigade and a battalion S1 a couple decades ago. And what I'm seeing today isn't too much different. Yep, we've got some access databases and some email and some things. But so I think we owe it to these great professionals that truly take care of commanders and make sure things are right for soldiers and their family to give the Army a better system so they can focus on that versus performing miracles.
All right, I think we're out of time. All right, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and me and Colonel McNulty will stick around if you had any other questions that you wanted to ask offline. Thank you.